Hi everyone, my name is Leanne and today I'm going to be wrapping up everything that I read in August. So these are going to be little mini reviews of all of the books that I read in the month of August. I read 8 books in August, so 4 of those were novels for adults. We had 1 YA novel, 1 children's novel, and then 2 non-fiction as well. And I think this has possibly been like my best reading month of the year. Everything that I read, I really enjoyed. There's some new favorites in the mix as well. So without further ado, let's get into chatting about the books. And I'm going to start with the adult fiction that I read. The first book that I read in August was The Herd by Emily Edwards, and this was such a fascinating book about such an interesting subject matter. This is a novel that has really big moral questions at the center of it. So we are following 2 families, mum, dad, and kids in both families, and the main link between these families are the mothers, who have been really great friends, really best friends for quite a long time now. One of the children in one of the families wasn't able to be vaccinated, wasn't able to get her MMR vaccine when she was really young because of illnesses that she had growing up. She had a lot of seizures. In the lead up to this girl's birthday party, her mother sends out an email to a bunch of the other parents, making sure that they are aware of their daughter's health conditions and just making sure that all of the other kids are vaccinated. This mother is like super health conscious for her child. And as the novel progresses, it transpires that her best friend, the other mother in this novel, has not been entirely honest about whether her own child that has a lot of contact with the daughter who hasn't been vaccinated because of health reasons, their children have a lot of contact together. And the whole novel is kind of about how parenting styles and differences in parenting styles and decisions can really impact friendships as you progress to that parental stage in your life. The conflicts that can occur not only between friends but even within relationships if you want to make different decisions around what happens to your child and how you bring your child up. So it is centered around kind of the vaccination debate, but generally also raises questions about that kind of conflict when you choose to parent children differently. I think it was a bit of a wake-up call for me as well. I think I can sometimes live in a bit of an echo chamber and surround myself with people that have the same opinions as me. Like, for example, if or when I have a child, it would be a no-brainer for me for them to receive all of their vaccines, and I've never really thought about the fact that, you know, other people in my life might disagree with that, and I've just never really thought about that before. And not even just in relation to vaccines, but any number of differences in like how you would decide to parent a child. I've never really thought about how that would impact my relationships with friends who had also become parents. This was just so compellingly written. Like, it had that kind of thriller-esque writing style that I really associate with kind of Leanne Moriarty books. I thought it was a really great depiction of kind of both sides of the perspective, really immersive in both like kinds of opinions. Read this so quickly, really immersive, compulsive storytelling. Highly recommend it. I also read Yinka, Where Is Your Husband by Lizzie Damilola Blackburn. This is a really warm, fun and sweet book. We are of course following Yinka, our title character, as she navigates so many different elements of her life. Her professional career, her friendships, her romantic life or often lack thereof. It's a novel that really looks at the pressures that are put on her as a young Nigerian woman who, from the perspective of a lot of her aunties, is seen as kind of being too old. Like, she should be settled down, she should be getting married now that she's in her 30s. People in her family are like really concerned, like worried for her because she hasn't got married yet. So it's really about that pressures that are put on her, particularly like as a Nigerian woman, as a Christian woman. There is this comedy element to this book as Yinka just kind of gets herself in a deeper and deeper mess because of lies that she ends up telling to just kind of get people off her back. And I felt like I was just kind of watching like behind my hands, like willing her to just stop getting herself in these situations where she has to like continuously lie to cover her tracks. She's such a lovable character, but you're just kind of willing her to stop getting herself into disaster after disaster. It was really heartbreaking as well, like watching her go through these patterns of insecurities, grappling with colorism and her insecurities around the color of her skin. Even though she's completely beautiful, she is constantly comparing herself to girls that have lighter skin than her. Throughout the book, she's going through this journey of self-acceptance, and it was wonderful to finally see her arrive at a place where she loved herself, she accepted herself, she celebrated herself. I found this book so fun. Like, the humor is perfectly balanced with the heavier topics that are covered as part of Yinka's life, and I thought that Christian Nigerian perspective is something that we don't see enough of in this genre. And I loved how much of this book was about female friendships as well. That was one of my favorite parts of this book. I also read Carrie Soto is Back by Taylor Jenkins Reid. You may know that Taylor Jenkins Reid is one of my favorite authors. I have loved every book that I have read from her, and Carrie Soto is Back is definitely a new favorite for me. So I'm sure that you've heard loads about this book already. So many people have read it. So this is a novel about a retired tennis player whose record of winning the most Grand Slams is about to be beaten by another tennis player. So Carrie Soto decides that she is going to come out of retirement in order to defend her record. I thought this was such an incredible depiction of female ambition and determination. I love reading about sport as well, and I mainly read about sport in non-fiction, so it was great to get a fictional depiction of sport. I had recently watched the documentary series about tennis that's on Netflix. I think it's called Breaking Point, and I loved that. So going from that documentary into this was fantastic. Tennis is a sport that has so much intensity to it, and there is a lot of like really detailed description of tennis matches in this book, and I found it like so thrilling and gripping and page turning. Like, I was feeling tense reading about these tennis matches and not knowing what was going to be the outcome of it. I loved hearing all about the training that Carrie was doing as well, and her trainer is her dad, and that relationship was just something that I found really touching as well. I thought it was really interesting to read about the very particular pressures that are put on female athletes as well. I thought all of the characters in this book were really nuanced. You know, they had really authentic feeling flaws to them, but you still wanted to root for them. Even those characters that seem like adversaries to our protagonist, like Carrie's main rival, she is such a fantastically crafted character, and you kind of see things from her perspective as well. Even though you're very much with Carrie, the other characters are crafted so well that you get a sense of their perspective on things. As I said, this was just a fantastic depiction of kind of female grit and ambition and determination, and how important it is to kind of uplift and celebrate and cheer on women. I also loved the little links that Taylor Jenkins Reid dropped into like her other books. I thought that was really fun. I also read Dating Dr Dil by Nisha Sharma, and this is an adult romance novel with some very steamy bits to it. So Karina is our female lead in this book, and she has these kind of grand dreams of romance and having a love marriage as opposed to arranged marriage, but she's not very good at like putting herself out there and meeting people. She doesn't really like dating apps. She spends a lot of time kind of at home. She's really into like restoring her mum's old car, and a lot of this book is about her trying to hold on to the connection that she has to her late mother, which I found really touching. But the kind of crux of the plot of this book is Karina's father is going to sell their family home, the home that her mother kind of created and built for them, and that is devastating to Karina. So she wants to be able to buy this house, and her father gives her a bit of an ultimatum that she's not going to be able to do that unless she gets married within 4 months. So this is another book where there's kind of a lot of pressure on a woman to get married. One day, an argument between Karina and Prim, who is also known as Dr Dil from his TV show, an argument between this pair goes viral, and their lives are kind of linked because of that. And this argument is about their very different approaches to romantic connection and relationships. So like I said, Karina is very much into a love match, and Dr Dil just doesn't think that's practical for many reasons. This argument also has a really negative impact on Dr Dil because he was trying to raise funding for a community health centre, and the argument has been a lot of negative press, so he's not going to be able to get the funding that he needs for this health center. And if he can convince the world that Karina is actually his soulmate and everything is mended, it's going to be the perfect PR for him to get his funding back. So these two begin this messy entanglement that Karina is really resistant to because they have such different approaches to love. But of course, over the course of the book, they realize that there is a romantic and certainly a sexual chemistry between the two of them. And as they learn more about their connection, they realize that they should both be more open-minded to how each other approaches love and relationships. I loved the backstory of both of these characters in particular. I thought their motivations felt really genuine, and the miscommunications that they have felt really genuine as well. Like, they didn't feel like really forced. The steamy scenes were just that. And I think the roles that both characters adopted in that sexual setting made a lot of sense. The one thing that I could not bear about this book is the fact that our male lead refers to his dick as his Charlie, and I just could not. Like, that was just so ridiculous and funny to me and not sexy at all. Apparently this is also a Shakespeare retelling, and I don't know if I just didn't get what Shakespeare play it was meant to be inspired by, but I just didn't get that at all. So overall, I thought this was really fun. Again, it's a perspective that I haven't read a lot from when it comes to my romance fiction. It's certainly not my steamy romance fiction. The book did what it was meant to do. It was just really entertaining. Next, on to the non-fiction. So I read A Secret Sisterhood by Emily Midorikawa and Emma Claire Sweeney. And this is a book all about the friendships between very famous classic female novelists and other women. So we're mainly looking at Jane Austen, the Brontes, George Eliot and Virginia Woolf, and the women in their lives that they shared correspondence and wrote letters to and shared friendships with. One of my cautions going into this book was I was fearful it was going to kind of gloss over the sapphic elements to some of these friendships, and it didn't. It definitely acknowledged and shared when there was sapphic elements to these women's relationships. There were definitely some sections of this that I found more interesting than others, and that kind of depended on like which writer was being covered. Like, I find George Eliot really interesting. I don't find the Brontes as interesting, and I think naturally I found sections that were kind of covering the time periods of novels that I'd read before I found a lot more engaging because I was kind of more familiar with the context. It was really fascinating to see how these women's lives impacted one another, and it gave so much of that kind of historical context that I was unaware of. I'm not big into my classic literature. Like, I've read quite a lot of classics. I've read quite a lot from all of these authors actually, but not kind of their full works. But I think if you are someone who is really into any of these writers and kind of really into the history of classic novelists, you would obviously get a lot more out of this than I did. But nonetheless, I thought it was a really great read. I also read Delusions of Gender by Cordelia Fine. So this is the second book that I've read from Cordelia Fine. I also read Testosterone Rex, and I have basically the exact same feelings on this book that I had on Testosterone Rex. Cordelia Fine is someone that writes about gender a lot, and specifically neurological elements of gender. So she really takes a deep dive into a lot of the scientific research, or acknowledges the lack of scientific research about the gender differences that we can see in the brain. And this book is essentially debunking a lot of the kind of myths that there are around having like a male brain versus a female brain, and really unpicks a lot of the problems with the studies that are often cited as evidence for there being major differences between how men and women's brains are wired. And she really dives into how the way we are socialized is impacting our brain development from even kind of before we are born. This is so vigorously scientific, but Cordelia Fine has this way of writing and this kind of conversational quality to her writing and wit that makes that really accessible if you are someone that doesn't come from a really kind of scientific background. And she really simply explains the problems with a lot of these studies that she is looking at. Really fantastic writing. If any of the kind of topics that she talks about sounds interesting to you, then I'd really recommend this. I'd also recommend reading Testosterone Rex. She has another book called A Mind of Its Own, which I haven't read yet, but would be really keen to, and I would imagine it is just kind of an extension of what she's been doing in this book and in Testosterone Rex, which is kind of debunking the bogus science behind a lot of ways we think about gender differences. The young adult novel that I read in August was Ace of Spades, which is a book that has had so much hype around it, but I've also heard like a lot of mixed things. Like some people said that it was kind of a bit too complicated, and I can definitely understand that perspective. So this is set at this private academy high school, and we are following what happens when an anonymous texter called Aces starts to spread people's secrets around the whole school. And specifically, Aces is targeting two students, one called Devin and one called Chiamaka. These two students are continuously a target for Aces, and gradually all of the secrets that are coming to the surface begin to ruin these two students' lives in really dark and dangerous ways. It takes a really long time for these two characters to kind of come together and acknowledge together what is happening to them, and also to come to the realization that they are specifically being targeted because they are Black. And I did find it a bit strange that it took them that long to kind of come to that realization. As they begin to investigate who Aces is, everything gets much more complicated, much darker, as they realize quite how deep-rooted this targeting of them is. I can certainly understand the criticism that this novel gets for being quite complicated because, as I said, as they are learning more and more about who Aces might be, it does become quite a complicated web, but in a way that acts as a metaphor for institutionalized racism. And I thought that was a really clever way of having a really pacey, plot-driven, thriller-esque plot that acts as this metaphor for something that is really deep-rooted and complicated and really, really difficult to unpack and overcome when kind of it seems like all of society is stacked against these young Black people succeeding. I thought it was really well written. Devin in particular was a character that I really felt the need to root for, and I'm really impressed that this was a debut novel and written by such a young author as well. This was really, really impressive, so I would be really excited to read more from this author. And finally, I read a children's book in August. So this is a book that is published by the place that I work, and I read Wolf Road by Alice Roberts. So you may know Alice Roberts off the telly. If you are someone who is into like your history programs, your archaeology programs, you may be familiar with Alice's work, and you may also be familiar with her non-fiction books for adults, but this is her first children's book. So in this book we are following Thule, who is a prehistoric girl, and we're following kind of her life as part of her tribe, and we're learning lots about what life would have been like for prehistoric societies, but particularly from a child's perspective, and what their role in these tribes were and the responsibilities that they had. And I thought that was really interesting. And I thought how kind of nature and the wilderness and the climate was written in this book was really interesting to learn about as well, even as an adult reader. One day, Thule comes across a boy who might be a similar sort of age to her, but is quite different in a number of ways. So his hair is very different from hers, his skin is different from hers. Just there's a few like physical differences between them, and this boy is a bit of an unknown to her and her tribe. There's a lot of kind of nervousness and caution around him, where he has come from, what his intentions are. But Thule very much just sees him as another child, as a friend, someone that she forms a bond with really quickly. I definitely won't spoil the ending for this book, but I thought the friendship between these two characters was really compelling. I thought Thule was such a lovely character. Thule also has a wolf companion as well, and as someone that loves dogs, although, you know, dogs very different from wolves, but I just thought that was really lovely that she had this wolf companion throughout the book. This was really just unlike anything that I had ever read, and certainly unlike anything that I'd ever read for children. It was really unique to stuff I'd read before, and it was just this incredible adventure and also gorgeously written as well. There's also illustrations from Keith Roberts throughout this, and that really brings the story to life even more. So that's it. They are all of the books that I read in August. Such a fantastic reading month. I think probably my best of the year. Just everything that I read was really fantastic. As I said, definitely some new favorites in there as well. Let me know down in the comments if you have read any of these books, and let me know what you thought of them. Let me know what your favorite book that you read in August was, and if you want to let me know you're here but you don't have anything in particular to say, leave me a like tennis related emoji. There's probably like a racket or a tennis ball in honor of Carrie Soto is back, because that's definitely a new favorite for me. If you want to connect with me elsewhere, my socials are always linked down below in the description. That's it for me today. I hope you're doing well, and I will speak to you in my next video.